Good to be together today to study God's Word and also to wish you all a happy 4th of July weekend. We will be, as a country, 241 years old come Tuesday. And so this is a very exciting time for us. But have you ever considered how the church got here? Can you remember who planted the seed for this church to be here in the first place? Well, not the church, the country. Let's go for the country and we'll come back to the church, right? Who planted the seed for America to be here? Who caused America to grow and who watered that seed after it had been planted? Well, I looked back a little bit on history and not having grown up in America, I had to take a few notes. And I found out that in 1492, on 4 occasions between 1402 to, from 1492 to 1502, Christopher Columbus came over 4 times looking for a trade route. And so that gave people an idea that there was another continent that could be settled. And then again in 1620, people actually took hold of this concept when William Bradford led a group of people to Plymouth Rock. And that is traditionally thought of to be the place where the first settlers came in. And so that was the planting of the country. A group of people saying, we don't want to have tyranny, we want to have freedom. And so then, after coming to this country, some of the people that they were fleeing away from decided that they're going to come here and tax this country, even though they had no legitimate reason or hold on this country. And so this caused the watering of the country, and this is the the Revolutionary War from 1775 to 1783. And a year after that started, on July the 4th, 1776, the next stage started during the watering stage, which would be the growth of the church when the Constitution idea started to be formulated. And we have the harvesting today, and we will continue to harvest, and this will continue to be a great country as long as we have a Constitution, and we honor that Constitution, and we pledge allegiance to the flag, and we stand when the national anthem is being sung. Then this is going to continue to be a great country. But at some time, we could cease to be a great country. See, the concept was planted, the concept was watered, and then the idea which caused the growth was this document, this Constitution, with its amendments that have come along in the years. Well, could you imagine a day coming by when people say, we no longer want the Constitution? It's at that point that this country will start to cease to be what it is today. In the same way, 2,000 years ago, the church was planted. Paul the apostle was one of those who planted all over the place. And then after it had been planted, it started to be watered. And Apollos and other preachers like Apollos who could wax wonders with a word were preaching and coming into works that had already been planted. And they were watering what had already been established. And then later on, we find that God gives the growth. So how can that be disrupted? Well, quite simply, when people take our Constitution and say we don't want it anymore. The Constitution that we have that makes the church great is the New Testament. It was a book of 26 different books, from Matthew through to Revelation. It was handed to us, and we become a great organism or body or family as long as what we are preaching, book, chapter, and verse. But people don't want that. They want their ears scratched, they got itchy ears, and they want the preacher to preach lessons that won't get us upset, won't disturb us, will just make us feel good. They want to come to worship and have a worship experience that is just so wonderful, but in fact has very little content. This is the reason we grow, is right here. It's the will of God given to us through Jesus Christ in these last days, in past times through the prophets and through the law, but in these last days is spoken to us through His Son, Jesus Christ, and it's given to us. So let's look at the ministry cycle of the church and consider what makes America great at the same time as we go through these different phases. Well, just to give you some background, we're going to look at the first church that really messed up. And by the way, that is just where we are right now. We are in the middle of the year, so there where it is red, that's where we are. We're in the serving stage. We've gone to the entering stage. We've gone through the cloning stage. The last one I'm excited about is the going stage. And I hope that we will all understand God's concept of growing a church like the Church of Christ that meets on the summit. And we will all develop this mindset in our own selves and want to fulfill this commission. But it starts off right now with you thinking about where you are. As I told you last week, you can take out a notepad and paper and write out the areas where you feel like you could serve most. The 3 areas we'll look at today is, do you feel like God is giving you more talent to bring the lost in? Or do you, in other words, go out and bring the lost in? Or do you think He's giving you a talent more to keep the saved and keep the church going and all the functions and the hard work that's there? Or is He asking you to be part of the growing stage or phase of the church? So look at those talents that we have. But just a background, as I said, 1 Corinthians 3, a lot of problems. They're the first church that went away from what God wanted them to do. And so they had a lot of different sins that are occurring, a lot of issues, more issues than any other epistle in this letter that Paul writes to the 1 Corinthians. The main problem was that they didn't realize that they are all equal. They thought that one person was more important than another. And so Paul is going to say, what is Apollos? What is Paul? We're all equal. In other words, we are nothing, but only one is great and God is great. And so we all need to understand that because God is great, we are all here to grow the body, to grow the kingdom as much as what we can by watering and planting and give God all the credit. Ever somebody says to you, thank you so much for coming to Nicaragua, look at all the good things you did, you say, to God be the glory, right? Always, we are nothing. We're absolutely nothing. We are fodder for worms, if you really want to know what we are. We are dust. It is God who is everything. And so let's look at the planting stage first off. And remember, Paul, the apostle, is the one that was called to Gentiles who went around planting. And so having looked at all these differences, he gives a corrective teaching here in one verse, in verse 6. I planted, Apollos watered, and then what does he say? Look at that word there, B-U-T. But God gave the increase. That's what we do. I understand that, but there's a big difference between what we do and what God is doing. So planting is very, very hard. We have some farmers with us here today, and they'll tell you that when they go out to plant a field, there's a lot of work involved. You first off have to go to the field, you have to survey the field, make sure that the field is almost level, and then you have to get rid of all the trees, all the stumps, all the rocks, all the stones, all the pebbles, and then you have to take a one-way through it, go very, very deep until it's really, really deep. After that, you go through with a next medium stage, you get a little bit more level, and you crush the big clods, and then you go with a final stage, and it makes that ground almost like sand. It's so smooth. And then you go and you plant it. But before you can do that, there's one more thing, and I never realized how important this was until I got involved with my uncle's farms when they turned new soil into viable agricultural land. You have to make sure it's water level, just about 100% water level. So when you put the water on, it's not going to roll off, it's just going to sit down there. And then the seeds that you put in. Sometimes if you're in a very arid country like we are, you have to use special seeds that have been treated. They're hybrid seeds. Need very, very little water, and they're very resistant against the pests of the country or the area that you're growing in. And then comes the most important stage, patience. A lot of patience as you wait for the water. Without the water, nothing's going to work. This year, I had a problem. I had 2 strips of grass that had disappeared on me. And so I had to till the soil, I had to get rid of everything. One slope is on a very bad downhill. There's nothing I could do about that. So I had to have seed, special seed that could grow in shade. And then I had to have a netting that I could put over that could hold the seed. And so I did one strip first, and then I took my netting off and I put it on the other strip. And now today I have grass. But what I want to tell you about this is planting is hard work. It's not very easy work when you go around doing that. So how do we at Summit accomplish planting? I'm sure if I had to ask Chris to get up here, he'll be able to say, I agree with number 1. Right, Chris? That's what he told us a few weeks ago. You pray for the soil, right? We have to be praying for the soil. And then we have to send out missionaries. And the missionaries are long-term missionaries and short-term missionaries. And then we have to support preachers. These are people who will continue to go out. And then we have to teach evangelism classes locally, and we have to reach out into our community. Today, as always, Billy went over to CTCC, and there were 7 souls there because 4th of July weekend, some of the families came and took some of the souls that are normally their way. And it's week after week after week, right, Billy? And sometimes you feel, wow, where's this going, And again, the group, 16 members that went from this, or 14 from this congregation, plus 2 associated with this congregation, went out. That's a lot of work. And then Ben and Forrest are still out. I saw Ben made 2 friends this week on Facebook with names I can't read the names. It's some funny alphabet or some funny language. So we keep going out. We keep going out. So do you feel that you fit into this category? Do you have a heart that wants to go out and bring in the lost? Mark chapter 14, verses 1 through 14, Jesus talks about sowing the seed. And in verse 14, he says that when we sow the seed is the word. Specifically, the sower sows the word. If we do everything wonderfully here at Summit, brethren, but we don't sow the word, what are we? Who are we? What is our identity? That is the one thing God asks all of us to do. Some of us may not feel comfortable doing it as aggressively as some of these categories up top there, but you do it in other ways. You always sow the word. Then in verse 15 of chapter 16, Mark chapter 16, the last chapter, we hear these words from Jesus. And he said to them, go into all the world and proclaim the gospel to the whole creation. Go into all the world. So we don't have a select area that we go. We go all the world. Specifically, when we leave these doors back there, either those doors, or if you go out these doors here, the moment you go out, you're entering into the mission field. And you need to know that. You don't know who God's going to bring in your way, but it's all the world. And you pray while you're sitting here in services. Pray that God will awake you to the fact that there is somebody who is going to be eternally lost if you don't preach the gospel. So he says, go into all the world and proclaim the gospel. What does that mean? Proclaim the gospel. I want all of you to know this. I don't want you to get in front of Jesus one day and he says, I gave you a great commission and you never did it. And you say, well, Lord, I didn't understand what the word gospel meant. So here it is. What is this? Anybody know what this is? This is a cross. Anybody know what this is? It's a tomb. Anybody know what this is? It's resurrection. The gospel of Jesus Christ is 3 things. Church, say it with me. The gospel is the death. The gospel is the burial. The gospel is the resurrection. Now, lest I make you do the hand signs also, right? Say it as loud as you can. The gospel is the death. The gospel is the That is what we need to do. We preach the gospel by dying with Jesus in baptism, by being buried with Jesus in baptism, and by resurrecting out of the baptistry with Jesus to walk a new life. Now look at this. Jesus said, or Paul said, the corrective teaching is we need to plant, we need to water, and we need to let God give the growth, right? So here it is. How do we plant? The death. We plant by dying with Jesus in baptism. That's where the planting. You believe that Jesus Christ, Son of God? That's the beginning of the planting. You believe it because somebody planted that in you. And so as a result, you die. Now, here comes the watering. You are what? You are buried with Jesus. Where? In baptism, right? And now here comes the growth. You are what then? Resurrected. Who resurrects you? Do you resurrect yourself? Does somebody pull you out of the water? Who resurrects you? Spiritually, it is God who resurrects you. So this cycle, this ministry cycle is in every single aspect. Not just in one aspect, but every aspect has 3 minor sections to it, which will have the growth, the death, which will have the planting, the watering, and also the resurrection. So here are some areas just to stimulate your thinking when it comes to planting. Before you can plant a seed, sometimes you need to purchase the soil. Nobody wants to purchase the soil. Nobody wants to go into Nicaragua and build a church building, right, Chris? But you get fruits if you'll do that, right? But you have to take that risk and putting the church building in the middle of nowhere. That's part of planting. And we don't want to do that. We want to have more tangible growth at times. But sometimes you need to plant, and purchase, and that takes visionary, it takes church planting, it takes building a church. What would have happened if nobody ever wanted to plant a church here on this summit? Where would we be today? You got that? You understand that? Planting, it's part of it, is purchasing the soil. Preparing the soil. How many times have you seen people preparing the soil? You pray for the soil, you get supplies, lots of clothes over here, you get your Bibles. I remember, Tom, just before you left, you said, Neville, where's the Spanish Bibles? So I said, they right there in that cupboard there, and he took a few of those Spanish Bibles with him. So there's supplies that you need. How about passports? Sometimes you need passports. All of this is designed in the preparing to plant. In 1610, we see that the people came to Plymouth Rock, and the first thing they did is bring out seeds that they brought from England. And they had seeds were barley and peas, but the most important crop was the maize. And the local Indian tribe taught them how to plant that over there. And so that's what we need to do. So right now, what we're going to do is sing one stanza. And Chris, if there's more, he's going to sing more, of 643, and it'll be on the overhead. Sowing the seeds of the kingdom. And as we do that, I want you to think about that first part. Are you called to plant? And I think we all in some way are. Chris? Sowing the seeds of the kingdom, brother, in the morning, bright and fair. Are you sowing the seed of the kingdom, brother, in the heat of the noonday's glare? For the harvest time is coming on, and the reaper's work will soon be done. Will your sheaves be many? Will you garner any for the gathering at the harvest home? Okay, we go on to the second stage. Again, some of you may be more interested in the planting stage, but some of you may be more interested in the watering stage. Now, if you think the planting stage is hard work, you have no idea what hard work is. That's the beginning of the hard work. Now, Chris, is it Guillermo, the preacher there? You left Guillermo with all that work. It's a work, right? You understand that. It is a work. It is a lot of work. We go in and we plant seeds, and we leave a guy there called Guillermo, and he has to go and conduct all those classes and all the saved people. He has to grow those saved people. You know how much work that is? That's a ton of work. And so what happens when we're doing this work is we grow in character and we grow closer to God. Paul said, I planted, Apollos watered. Once again, Apollos was known as an incredible preacher. I mean, he could really, really preach the word. And so great amounts of people would follow Apollos and say, I'm of Apollos. And Paul said, no. There's no one important. There's no reverends. There's no fathers. There's no pastors. There's no one who has anything and any title, according to Matthew chapter 23, verse 8 and verse 9 and verse 10. No one has any titles except Jesus Christ is the shepherd. Now, what about our elders? We have 3 pastors here today, 3 shepherds. That's the job they do. That's not a title they hold. That describes the role that they have. We have several deacons and ministry leaders, and talking to those deacons specifically, the word deacon means servant, somebody who is given the authority to wash your feet. Wow, okay? See, it's a role that you do. It's not something that you need to brag about, because we brag about only one, and that is God, because He's everything, and we'll come to that in the third point. But we see that in this stage, there are several things we do. There's preaching. Every Sunday, there's a lot of preaching that goes on. There's teaching. Steve was really getting worried that the curriculum wouldn't come in, and fortunately Thursday when Morgan and I looked, the curriculum turned up, and so that was a really good thing. And then there's building. Who wants to build a parking lot? Glenn, thank you so much for fixing the roof over here, but who wants to do that? Who wants to do the maintenance stuff? Just now I saw that there was some garbage in a canister there that shouldn't be in that canister. It should have been the one next to. Somebody went and took it out and put it in there. There's going to be somebody tomorrow morning that's going to come through this building. There's always things going on. There's a lot of work. A lot of work goes on, and these things for the next 2 weeks, this week gone by, and this coming week, Morgan was on vacation this past week for 3 days. I'm on vacation for a few days this coming week. So we're not doing the assignments, but we'll do the assignments after that again. And all kinds of work comes out of those assignments. A lot of character building as we grow closer to God. And sometimes that work is exciting, but sometimes it's just boring. One of the people that I think about when it comes to who came to America and actually was part of not just planting, but part of watering. I think about Paul Revere. I don't know if you all remember the story of Paul Revere, how he went at midnight and said, the British are coming, the British are coming. But how many of you like to be woken up in the middle of the night, at midnight? How many of you would be very happy with Paul Revere saying, the British are coming, the British are coming? Sometimes it's not nice work, and history seems to say that there were 3 men involved here, not just one. But it was a job that was well done, and it's a job that stood this country in a good stead in a time that it needed to be about. So how many of you like to be involved in the work that's going on here? The ministry leaders, the group that's in the AV thing right now, Candace that week after week posts the YouTube videos ready for us to send out. How many of you want to be in that type of work? There's a song that we sing, and we're not going to sing it now, but these are the words of that song. To the work, we are servants of God. Let us follow the path that our Master has trod. With the balm of his counsel, the healing of his counsel, our strength to renew, let us do with our might what our hands find to do. Toiling on, toiling on, toiling on, toiling on. Let us hope and trust. Let us watch and pray and labor till the Master comes. There's a lot of work, and the stanzas go on, and I've got them all here in front of me. Feeding the hungry, the weary be led. There is labor for all, for the kingdom of darkness and error shall fall. Just a lot of work that needs to be done. So we all have to find our spot, just like everybody in this country needs to find the part that they can fit into to make this country or continue to make this country great. So too we need to keep doing that with the church. Brings me to the third stage, the harvest stage. The last thing I want to look at in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 6, Paul says, I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. And he continues to say that who is Paul and who is Apollos? We are partners. We are ministers here just doing this together, but we're equal. And who's great? We're nothing, but God is everything. And then he says, you are God's building. You are God's field. In other words, Paul was coming and he was planting churches. And these churches ended up being the building, ended up being the field that he's talking about. But everything comes back to that one thing. God is everything. In Matthew 13, verse 8, we read about what happens if we plant the seed. Other seed fell on good soil, produced grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. I want to just quickly mention to you something that I mentioned in my Bible class this morning. I was thinking about the church in Chattanooga that for the last 25 years have been sending out missionaries, short-term missionaries. And I asked Chris this morning, how big do you think they were when they started? And he said, I don't think they were very big. And I think if he goes and asks them, you'll find that to be true. But getting involved in planting and watering really ignited that church. They didn't have to do anything locally. See, what you sow, you reap. You understand? We just have to do what God calls us to do. He'll do the rest. We have another church in Paducah, and Guin and I were with that church not too long ago. And the church in Paducah is interested in sending out young AIM students all over the world. And I know that they also started as a small church, but right now they're about a 350 plus member church And their bulletin article is on the board there because one of our members still goes and visits there in the hometown and comes from that place. And so we're very proud. You can ask the Brandon family; they'll tell you all about that church. I think is it the Lone Oaks Church of Christ? It's an incredible church. But again, they just got involved in these short-term missionaries. Actually, theirs is 2-year missionaries sending out young people, and they have a big map, and they show through the years where all these students have gone. And they've just about covered the map with what they've done in the last 20, 25 years. But they just did what God asked them to do. And got involved in missions, and God brought the increase. So the harvest is God's stage. But there are some things that we can do when it comes to growth. We can be involved in baptizing people. When we baptize somebody, it's God who's given the growth. And so the person who baptizes you is not important, not at all. But God is the one that will give the growth there, and so all the credit goes to Him. The planning stage, planning the next phases of Summit, there's growth involved over there. The managing the current growth. This growth has taken years to come about. And Ken, we spoke this week along with Bill Sr. about how many churches in this area don't exist anymore because they didn't maintain the current growth that they had, and so that's important. Also, funding good works for the future towards growth. Are you aware that we fund the Baxter Institute, and they put out preachers all the time? So that's a very good work. Also, making sure that Summit souls are ready at any moment to give an answer to God and to be prepared for God to receive them home. There is growth involved there as well. When you look at the population of the United States of America, you can see that we've grown tremendously over the last few years. In 1920, we were 100 million. And then in 1960, we doubled to 200 million. And today, in 2015, we are 321 million. New York City is one of the biggest cities in the world, second biggest city in the world behind Tokyo. So there's a lot of responsibility to grow this country correctly. But just so, there's a lot of responsibility to grow this church correctly. Whenever I ask people about what is the most important thing in their life, they might say their spouse, they might say their children, they might say their job or their studies, and I always say no. The most important entity in your life has to be God. Without that, things won't work out right. It's strange seeing young couples come into marriage counseling and you see them trying to vie for power, trying to see who's the most powerful. And before marriage, it will fluctuate between the male and the female. And then in marriage, there'll be a lot of arm wrestling. But as soon as the baby comes, guess who's the boss? And then everything is turned upside down until those parents can get their act together again, right? And say, no, that's not the order that God wanted it. Who's the boss? God's the boss. Same with this country. I have 2 more slides to show you when it comes to this country. This is what George Washington said. It is impossible to rightly govern a nation without God in the Bible. And then Ronald Reagan said, if we ever forget that we are one nation under God, then we will be a nation gone under. And so it's a tremendous privilege for us to celebrate the 4th of July this coming Tuesday. But it's also a tremendous responsibility to realize that we've been entrusted with a beautiful country. Brethren, there is no country in the world like the United States of America. And you just have to remember a few weeks back when we heard how many different languages were spoken in this building to realize no matter what you hear on TV, people are trying to get into this country. But we have a responsibility to keep this country a nation under God, a country that is governed with the Bible and with the Constitution. When that stops, this country is going to have a problem. But that's not in our hands, except through prayer. Here is what is in our hands. The Summit Church of Christ. God wants us to plant. God wants us to water. And He says, I will give a crop. I will give growth. Sometimes 100 times. Whatever your role is, please consider that today. As we offer this invitation of bringing in the harvest on behalf of God, I want you to think about the fact that some of us need to start that walk. We've not been baptized with Jesus. In other words, we've not died yet, we've not been buried yet, and we've not resurrected to walk a new life. If that is the case in your life, please consider answering this invitation today. On the other hand, if you look at this and you realize there's something that you need to do, then do what one person did last week that was sitting listening to our sermon last week, getting ready for this one. Went to one of the elders and said, I want to get involved, right? And so that's what we need to do. You can do that by either coming forward or talking to one of the elders. But during this invitation, I invite you to come forward right now as together we stand and sing.